just a ton of thunderstorms in my area. Welcome back to the Nautical Chronicle. I'm here with Raging Mandrill, a Old Glory Club founding member. How are you doing, Mr. Mandrill?
Oh, passably well.
Well, I mean that's that sounds like an understatement considering how you're going to be one of the speakers in the upcoming Old Glory Club National Conference in a few days. Are
This
you
is
going to give
true.
us any sneak peeks into are you going to
Uh,
give us any
well,
sneak peeks into what your speech is going to be like, or is that something of a
uh,
secret?
I can give a hint. Yes. So I am going to be introducing a figure from the 20th century, who, in my view, is basically the creator of Boomer Truth, to put it very bluntly. And basically my speech is going to be outlining his work and some of the crucial details I have found out about him because of some of the modern liberal rediscovery of this figure. He's very obscure. Nobody really knows who he was, or he didn't really have a huge amount of intellectual influence from, after the war. But beforehand, his most famous work, I think he did, and it's basically the task of my talk to introduce not only that book but his thought in life in general. Hello. Hello.
I'm sorry if I'm am I cutting out,
Yeah.
or I'm sorry
Yeah.
guys in the chat if Mandrill or I are cutting out. I've had I've been having connectivity issues all day, but I'm sure everyone's
Just cut out again. I don't hear him right now. Oh, yep, there he's gone. The stream is now mine. I have taken over the stream. This is a mandrill coup. I have launched a naval invasion of Clossington's channel.
Well, not no no. Hold on there. Where I'm at right now, we're having something of a thunderstorm out here. So I guess the
Is that a
producer.
thunderstorm or naval gunfire?
I oh God, I have no clue. Um, One second. The real Clausen is going to be on in just a few seconds, and
Once again, I am solo.
I'm back. Well, that could have been a lot smoother. Um, but yeah, I'm glad to have you on because A, promotion for the Old Glory Club national event, and B, I hear you're something of a naval guy, and this is, as you know, the Nautical Chronicle, which is something of a naval appreciation show. Would you care to give any of your credentials?
Sure. So, as everybody knows, I am a former naval officer. I was in the U.S. Navy for a couple of years, did my time, and so I know a little bit about some of these things and these matters. So I can definitely add to the discussion for sure.
So the I guess the main thrust of this particular stream is in general. Uh, well, I guess it's sort of centered around one particular ship and its the context around its creation. And so I'm going to bring it up right here. The USS Olympia. It's one beautiful ship. I visited it about 3 weeks ago. It was what's a pre-dreadnought armored cruiser. It has two big old main guns in the front, two big guns in the back, then about 20 different secondary armament, smaller guns throughout it. Um, it's a rusting museum ship in Philadelphia Harbor right now, and I just had to pick up a an old model ship kit of it. This particular kit it was made the plastic was actually tooled and made in 1950 59, boxed in 1974. I tried to get my hands onto it's called the Encore brand um, model, which has like finely crafted metal pieces, like little metal pieces in a real wooden deck, but I couldn't find any copies of it online, so I'm just gonna have to suck it up and use the crummy Revell model kit from like you know 70 years ago or whatever. Um, but I'm going to end up painting it in the colors that it originally was when this is the sort of famous Great White Fleet color scheme of buff, which is this like brownish, copperish, goldish color, white and red. Um, but for now, I just need to put the thing together. Um, so one of the reasons why I'm having you on is to talk about a very sort of underappreciated um, element of U.S. naval history, and that particular time period is called the Doldrums, and it's the sort of context behind why it was necessary to create the Great White Fleet and have that paraded around, and why it was necessary to have something of a naval buildup in the 1880s and 1890s. Um, so
Right.
I'll just
So we should probably start.
turn on my camera.
Ah, yes. We should probably start
Yeah, so the doldrums.
with, well, the Civil War first of all, right?
So
The Civil War had several
right,
warfare and technological innovations in naval terms. And those technological innovations essentially were the proliferation of steam power, number one, for the engineering plants, the usage of steel hulls, either, surrounding a wooden hull or just normal steel hull for like monitor ships and that sort of thing. And the actual invention and usage on those monitors of turret, a single turret, usually in the famous case of Monitor versus Merrimack. Like Monitor had a two-gun turret, and those turrets could be 360 degrees. Right. This is the classic beginnings of battleship technology. In dreadnought terms, but it's like 50 years, 60 years before dreadnought was a thing. So those are the
uh,
big three innovations to start with.
like I believe uh, the first iron hulled U.S. warship was the USS Michigan, which was made in Erie and used to like fight off the Fenian raids when you know it's sort of a little esoteric about how a bunch of Irish tried to cross the Great Lakes to invade Canada, but that's neither here nor there. We had very what we have for this model. You have these crude turrets over here in the front and back as the sort of primary armament. Uh, I if I remember correctly, there was a good bit of there was a good bit of changes between the initial sort of monitor rotating turret and the turrets that we see with these pre-dreadnoughts, right? Um, like if I remember correctly, for the monitors, the entire thing like uh the entire turret rotated on like a on like a spindle or something, as opposed to I'm not sure what the modern day turret would be called. Um, but I guess that's
A
neither
turret.
here nor there. Yeah, I mean a turret's a turret. Um, but I remember posting on Twitter a while ago that um, in the short term, right after the Civil War, the future of I guess naval design looked like it would be the CSS Virginia with essentially giving out like a broadside worth of smaller cannons enclosed in um, what's it called? In like a core battery, like in the center of the ship, right?
It's called the Citadel. The
I forget.
Citadel is usually the armor
Yeah,
plating in the center of a ship. In a modern warfare context like the USS Olympia, a Citadel is generally referring to the area of the ship beneath the waterline where the engineering and propulsion spaces are. If you get a hit inside of the Citadel, that is usually going to be a dead warship.
right. Like just to give like a little bit of what do you say? We really didn't have torpedoes up until must have been like the 1870s. Like the first self-propelling torpedoes. I believe it was like some French designer who made them. But right along the water line, where you can see like on here, it's where the red paint starts. Um, right above it is a thicker belt of armor that is meant to, I guess, protect the ship from any sort of incoming torpedoes or sort of incoming fire. Um,
Yes, this
and
is
that
called
was
the armor belt. Usually, you see this more on battleships. In the case of USS Olympia, which I don't think is actually technically an armored cruiser, I think it's formally classified as a protected cruiser, which has a slightly different designator because it refers to the fact that the coal bunkers inside of the ship are located adjacent to the hull. I guess in an attempt in the era when you're trying to maximize engineering protection and space considerations, where your ships are totally powered by a rock. Basically, you can put those rocks adjacent to the hull and get some additional protection that way. So I think that's the formal designation as protected cruiser.
right. Uh, and I guess the term cruiser, just to differentiate between what a cruiser is versus what a battleship is. Um, I don't believe at this time there was two, like the difference is just I guess size and primary armament, right? Where
Correct.
cruisers didn't usually have these big giant guns in the front.
Right, and you
Uh,
have to remember this is also in the pre-dreadnought era as well. So even battleships, which are contemporary with USS Olympia, which do also have the twin gun rotating turrets like Olympia has, uh, they would not have the layout of gun turrets that you see in the modern battleship format, where you have three or possibly even four gun turrets with two or three guns, or in the case of the French battleship Rochelle, you have four guns. Um, you have those arrangements in as the primary armament, and then everything else is basically a secondary and almost an afterthought. Um, and that's the reason why you have a distinction between dreadnought and pre-dreadnought. Now, for
Like
um,
if you just look on the Olympia, there are these tiny little, I guess, what are they, like 5, 6 inch diameter guns, like little pea shooters. Um, in this time,
or less than that in some
yeah,
cases.
like in this
It's common
time,
to have
shots
3 inch
of
guns.
mhm,
Very common to have 3 and 4 inch guns because you have to remember the
yeah,
armor
like
protection was not as nearly as much, and the ranges of engagement were not nearly as far as today, or even in World War II terms with battleship guns. And
yeah,
really, if we want to go back to the designation between a cruiser and a battleship, a battleship is called a battleship because like in warfare terminology, you have to think of it as in the age of sail, it is a ship of the line, right? You have three different tiers of warship classically, right? You have a a frigate, which is the lowest class. It's the fast ship. It's what you use for commerce raiding. It's what the United States used in the age of sail. The six frigates, the famous start that the United States Navy got.
mhm.
And then you have a mid-tier ship, which I'm forgetting the name of off the top of my head because I can't remember sailing. But then, of course, you have the ship of the line, which is basically battleship in the age of sail. And really, this is one of the innovations of the time period of the doldrums. Is nobody really knows what warfare technology is going to look like because you have so many innovations all happening at the same time. And it's not uncommon during this period to have warships become obsolescent, you know, after they're built, just given the pace and the rapidity of engineering change. And this is why Alfred Thayer Mahan, who's a very famous American naval theorist, he essentially put out the theory that navies, if they wanted to be relevant, needed to have ships of the line, right? This is the battleship, the age of the battleship, right? And so what you're
Yeah,
seeing,
I've got my my copy of Mahan right in front of me.
excellent,
Um, so
excellent,
if I remember correctly, Alfred Thayer Mahan, he's this professor at the Naval College. He essentially
yeah,
publishes his history of uh, naval. I mean, his the book is called "Influence on the Sea on Influence of Sea Power Upon History, 1660 to 1783," I believe.
yes,
It's essentially a series of university lectures um, about how different naval doctrines have changed over time. What which elements of naval grand strategy actually work historically and what don't, and
yes,
what are the sort of um, like what types of things do you actually have to account for as a grand strategist in terms of culture, how your government is structured, geography, um, and he comes to a few different conclusions. One of which is, international trade across the oceans is an economic multiplier that if you have enough power projection using big guns to project sea power and control these seas, you are in a lot better of a position than if you were just isolated. Um, I believe he quoted this one French minister who looked at France and said, "Oh, what a wealthy nation is France," while they were being navally blockaded and the fields were fallow because they couldn't export anything. Um, so his
yes,
theory was, you need a big battle fleet to project power and to well he became something a of an international commentator pundit um, later in his
yes,
life, sort of espousing
yeah,
the virtues and use of big gun navies, almost becoming a character of himself in the
Well,
process. But
the reason
um,
for this historically, if I may
but
briefly have a slight
his
sidebar.
influence
Hello.
was. Mhm.
If I have a brief
Yeah,
sidebar, so the
I can
reason
hear you.
the reason why Mahan says that you need big gun battleships and ships of the line is the historical example of the wars between the English and the Dutch. The Anglo-Dutch wars in the 1600s were basically maritime commerce wars for who controls the sea, especially the English Channel and the commerce routes. So one of the things that the Dutch did, because they have the geography that they do, is they have these rather flat-bottomed ships, and because they're a very small nation and not a lot of trees necessarily, you have to maximize the resources that you have. And what the way that the Dutch decided to do this is they were basically converting their merchant fleet over to a military fleet during time of war. And this in the Age of Sail is theoretically possible. However, this is why Mahan he says that big, basically purpose-built battleships and a fleet is and a standing navy is actually a good thing, because if you don't have this standing fleet, which is trained, which has the firepower required, which is basically an ersatz fleet using whatever armaments you can just slap on it. You're more likely to win engagements over the long haul, and you're more likely to win wars of attrition when it comes to naval combat. So this is the reason why Mahan says this. This is the reason why everybody starts building battleships after his theory gets accepted, basically. So go ahead.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, his theory was that uh, if you have a bunch of small, well, first off, he kind of discards commerce raiding as a tactic. He calls it like, was it jour de course or something?
Yeah, guerre de
That
course, and the other one is guerre
um,
de the other
jour de
tactic
course.
the other tactic he's referring to is guerre de scar, which means war of annihilation, basically. And so he is a proponent of big, decisive
Yeah,
battles on the high seas.
like
Yes,
he basically gives a justification that, hey, in the 7 Years' War, right, the French privateers essentially uh, capture about 30% of the English fleet, but they're never able to, take on convoys or actually blockade England itself. And it's kind of it's almost a moot point in um, the grand scheme if you're not able to fully blockade the enemy fleet. Uh,
this is true.
a nation can, if they have enough resources, they can just create convoys, and convoys can fend off small merchant ship, small privateers. Um, and he theorizes that the best, if you have two small armies versus one big army, or I'm sorry, if you have two small fleets and they're being opposed by one big fleet, the one big fleet can, even if it's smaller than the two enemy fleets combined, it can defeat each of them separately. So the best option is, of course, to consolidate your fleet and knock out the enemy fleets in one decisive battle, just to knock them out, and then you have all the benefits of sea power and owning the seas. We have all sorts of strategic mobility, and you can blockade, and you can do all sorts of fun things, and deny and have sea denial, and just deny the enemy access to trade and starve
Right.
them out.
Right, and of course, this idea of denial, this anti-access area denial strategy, is essentially there's a concept called fleet in being. Right, you don't need to have a fleet that is precisely equal to your enemy's fleet in total numbers, or even necessarily in quality per se, but you just need to have enough of a credible threat where the enemy fleet is not going to be able to fully blockade you. They have to run the risk of the decisive battle. and so they might choose to, rather than risking their fleet, they might be a little more conservative in their tactics. Which this actually brings us to a good jumping off point here, because the
Like
U.S.
one of yeah.
the U.S. Navy actually, in the aftermath of the Civil War, they languished around, and you can imagine after the war ends, you have a bunch of decommissioned ships that are in mothball and they're trying to preserve these assets, right, that are ancient basically, and if they need to reactivate. And one of the reasons why the U.S. Navy in the period of the Doldrums, it actually doesn't need to be as large as it was. There are two reasons for this. The first one is because national strategy does not require a large navy from the point of view of the United States at this time. The foreign policy and ambitions of the United States were all on the consolidation of the American continent, number one. And they're also, the second one is the technology is changing so
Yep.
rapidly that if you invest in very, very expensive warships that become obsolete by the time you build them almost, this is a bit of a wasted investment. So why not play the game conservatively, see what kind of innovations take? You wait for somebody to come out with the first innovation, you reverse engineer it, you make your own little tinkering improvements, and you have a better version of what your rival actually created in the first place. It's never a good thing to invent something. It's actually always better to steal that and then copy it and make a better version of it. So that's just the basic theory of tech transfer. Right. So this all comes to a head in 1881. There is a report that Secretary of the Navy William H. Hunt gave to Congress, and he basically tells the Congress that, hey, our aging wooden ships are no longer able to protect and serve the national interest abroad. We need to do something about this. And this is roughly the same time as when Alfred Thayer Mahan's book comes out.
Well,
It came out a little
if I
bit
remember
later,
correct,
but
no, I'm here. If I remember correctly, there was also after the Civil War, there was also the Virginius affair, right, where
yes.
essentially American gun runners to Cuban revolutionaries were caught and hanged, and in 1871, and there was a massive American outcry. They can't just execute Americans, even if they were kind of pirates. But the U.S. couldn't do anything because Spain had um, a giant ironclad like corvette that was essentially unassailable by any other ship in the U.S. fleet, just parked in New York City. Kind of a national embarrassment almost.
Yeah,
And
and
if I remember correctly, like even by like the 1870s, like the Brazilian Navy was larger than the U.S.'s Navy. So
yes, this was the
it's kind
period
of
of when
rough.
this is the period when all the Latin countries had pretty substantial fleets. Yeah. Well, the whole Spanish cruiser thing, like the American government actually tried to mobilize all of its rusting Civil War era ships that were in mothball, and as you might expect from um, you know uh, trying to reactivate a fleet that's been sitting in rusting for 6 years, it didn't go quite as well as planned. Um, so this is a great disappointment, obviously, but thank goodness we never actually had to go to war. Um, yes, so this basically, this whole incident, as well as Mahan's influence, that like these are things which are all converging in at the similar time periods, and basically we decided to make a new uh, class of cruiser, right? This is the ABCD class, or the basically it's based off of the USS Atlanta, right? And it's called the Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, and Dolphin. These are the four ships from the ABCD class, and they're notable because they have full iron hulls. They have they're kind of a transitional form, aren't they? They have like these big masts, but they also have and they have broadside guns. They don't really have turrets, um, and but they all have like steam propulsion, and they have the smokestacks that you kind of expect from ships of the early 20th century. And this is how we start to get our mojo back in naval terms. Um, yes, and of course, later we would construct some actual battleships. Right, you start with the USS Maine and USS Texas, and those both get commissioned 9 years after the ABCD ships get built, and that's in 1895, I think.
Hmm.
And those are interesting because they actually those are like obviously they're commissioned the same year as USS Olympia that you have here. So this is the exact same period. But the innovations of those battleships is right. Obviously, they're clear battleships in pre-dreadnought terms. So they have all of the things, all of the bells and whistles that you expect of a battleship. Right? They have a turret. They have 12-inch guns or whatever it is, 10-inch, 12-inch guns. You've got armor. You have total steam
Hmm.
propulsion, triple expansion engines. So they're basically steam turbine driven, basically. Um, all of the things, and so this is when you're really in the high era of um, battleship
So
style
one
here.
of the one of I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was always kind of curious. Like I'll try and pull it up. Um, for some reason, the USS Maine. I'm gonna try and find a good photo, but its guns are arranged diagonally for some reason. I've never understood why. It just does not seem like a very good like it's on like one of the main guns is on the front right, and the other is in the back left. I never understood why they decided to design it like that. That just sounds like a fast way to sink it in a storm. And then USS Texas, it's designed like a nightmare. Like I don't know how to describe it. Um, but those are the two big battleships that were meant like battleships. They're slower, more heavily armed. They protect the U.S. coast as opposed to cruisers, which cruise around the globe, doing whatever they need to do. Um, I don't
Yeah, the
know.
emphasis
Maine
here
always
is
seemed kind of strange.
yeah,
Mhm.
the emphasis here is that this is all pre-dreadnought battleships. The layouts are not standardized in the way that we would perceive of a battleship as it is in World War One or World War Two, where you have basically two turrets, one slightly elevated and one beneath the other one, and then you have one in the aft section of the ship, right, or two, as the case may be. But this is basically like very experimental, right?
Like
You have to imagine they're still thinking in terms of ship of the line, right? And of course, there's engineering constraints and things that I'm sure of why these turret layouts are the way that they are. I'm sure there's stability concerns and all of that, and they're trying to like maintain, in their view, 360-degree coverage around the entire ship, which is probably why they have them laid out like that.
right. Like um like in terms of experimentation, we of course have like probably the next ship after I get done with the Alabama and Olympia is the Cesarevich, which I have a certain love for tumble home design, which is essentially the hull slopes inward uh, at a steep angle so that you can build up higher and have the guns uh, at a higher up position. And there are some other structural, you know, benefits, but it's a very peculiar design where it looks like, you know, the belly is too the belly is too fat. It looks like a submarine, just how slick and smoothed out its surfaces. But
Hmm.
it, it's a very endearing kind of ugly design era, like these floating hotels. Um, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, it's a like in the Olympia. One thing that kind of stuck out to me is the fact that I guess like right in the front there's like a torpedo port right here, just for some reason, for some ungodly reason. There's a torpedo like launcher right in the front.
Well, that makes a lot of sense if your intention is to drive at high speed towards a ship of the line, launch a torpedo, turn, 20 or 30 degrees to port and launch a broadside before you peel off and get away after you get a successful torpedo hit.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem very aerodynamic, all things considered. Or yeah, but what else? Um, one if I remember correctly, in the Battle of Manila Bay, only about 1% of the shots fired actually ended up landing hits. Um, just because of how like there wasn't any radar, you just had to kind of eyeball where your shots landed and perform very crude calculations for the main guns to try and hit something.
You
But
know, you know,
I
I'm not
yeah,
sure what during this time period if they have alidades or not. Right. So an alidade is a sort of it's like a mechanical calculator, right, that you hold in your hand, and based off of the given height of an object, you can find, and your own height, of course, you can find how far away it is precisely. And it's actually a very precise instrument, but of course, it requires you to know what the height of the object you're looking at is. I don't know if Dewey's squadron had that particular implement at the time, but it just goes to show you that, gunnery in this era is very inaccurate. And even in the Second World War, it like surface vessel fires against other surface vessels are like at the ranges that they're shooting at just don't really have the accuracy that you might want. This isn't World of Warships, guys.
like even if I remember correctly, even in the Battle of Jutland, the the fleets only had about a 2% accuracy or like 2% hit rate.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah, that's about
and
correct.
and this was
I have my book in
yeah.
front of me, which says that the American shots at Manila Bay were about 2.4% accuracy. So that's about right.
Like I was mostly going off of both the big guns and the secondary armament. Just I'm I think I got my 1% accuracy from Drakenfeld's USS Olympia video.
Mm.
I have another book on the Olympia. It's it's like what was it called? It's like the something of Empire, whatever it's called. Started reading it about a week ago, but it's it's all right. It's not the best naval book ever, but even if it was only 2.5%, if it was greater than 2.5%, that's still you know not great. But it does go to show that back in pre-radar days, uh, and before all these fire control computers, you know, quantity over quality was something of the rule. But then came HMS Dreadnought and kind of blew everything out of the water.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yes. Is there
if I
anything
remember
else we should?
correctly, the Olympia was originally designed not as a yeah.
No, continue, please.
If I remember correctly, the Olympia and a lot of these early new fleet cruisers were originally meant to be commerce raiders. So instead of going fleet to fleet, going to fight like some other capital ship, the Olympia's goal was to be able to be fast enough and big enough to take on the escorts for convoys, rather than fighting big gun battles. But which is why it has the such a decent sized primary armament, two big guns in the front, two big in the back, for its size. And I've kind of noticed throughout American history, we like to put big guns on ships that are not necessarily like correctly sized for the amount of the amount of firepower that they have with them. Like previously, like the very first small ship they made was the USS Constitution, and it infamously had a bunch of heavy cannonades and a very, very heavy armament for its size, but very short range as well. Which I don't know. It seems like a reoccurring U.S. Navy motif. Getting bang for your buck, and I guess damn, damn the float, the I guess buoyancy and stability. I don't know though. That must have just been what it used to be.
Well,
Like
yeah,
I always likened, yeah.
all of the big battleships, if you remember from like throughout all of history, right? Whenever you have a battleship, a modern steel ship of the line get hit and actually sink, they don't sink like the Titanic did, right? They always roll over. They always roll over onto their and they capsize, and that's how they go down, right? And there's a famous video you can see of an example of this, of an Austro-Hungarian ship which did this in World War One. I forget the name of that ship, but you can go look it up on YouTube. There is actual video footage of these things, and like they're just all very very top heavy, right? And there's a concept in naval construction and warfighting, I guess, and damage control that you need to learn, which is called stability, right? If you have uh,
Well, I mean,
these
I
sorts
took
of
my fluid mechanics and fluid statics courses in college. Metacentric height and all that,
right.
stability versus buoyancy, and yeah.
Well, from the damage control point of view, right, and especially when you've got these new ships of the line that are coming out, right, you're basically giving them the modern watertight doors and that sort of thing. This is one of the other innovations that are coming out during this period. And of course, you need this in a steel ship because otherwise your whole ship is going to flood. It's not a wood ship where if it punches a hole through it, it's going to float because it's made out of wood. This is not true for steel ships. Um, so you have to find a way of limiting the damage and preventing the ingress of water. And so the problem with that is once you start flooding individual compartments, um,
Are you going
that
to talk about like ballasts
well, I
or
mean,
I'm sorry, bulwarks?
yeah, that's basically what you're talking about. It's a watertight bulwark, right? And or it's the same thing with watertight bulwarks. It's the same thing with hatches that would come later. But anyway, the entire point of this is that if you start, flooding spaces on a ship, what you have to imagine that the waves are going to roll a certain ship a certain way on the ship, and you're going to sway side to side. And if you have too much weight on one side, you begin to list to one side. And of course, you have to think, if you're already like several degrees over on one side, then a wave comes, even a normal sized wave will come up and you will sway, and you won't be able to, the ship won't be able to right itself, and it will just capsize over. And this is how these things happen, right? So, yeah, this is why these innovations are absolutely
What
critical.
what's this the ship in Sweden that what's the sailing ship in Sweden that listed over after firing one broadside? Um,
I know which one you're talking, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
I forget what it was called. Uh, basically,
Vasa,
it just
the Vasa.
you know fired one broads fired one broadside and then flipped over and the portholes got flooded and it just listed over and sank.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the Vasa.
it's shoot that yeah, that's the Vasa, but your point still stands. Like yeah, uh, I remember during the Great White Fleet, these casemates over here uh, notoriously started flooding whenever the seas got a little bit rough or it started raining a little too hard. And one of the additions was, hey, we need to waterproof these somehow um, to prevent you know to prevent any more threats to flooding. But um, I think one of the questions I had for you was, I guess, in the immediate evolution from, I guess, sailing ships to full like pre-dreadnought battleships was um, what did the evolution look like from the American perspective? Because the British have a very steady evolution um, from like the devastation class all the way up to dreadnoughts, where the devastation was had a very low freeboard and only a few big guns. They were very crude. But what did we actually advance the? Did we actually advance like I guess armor? You know, did we have any sort of such advancements in design where we could point to our own national heritage genealogy? Like, did we have armored, turreted, crewed ships of our own, or did we just rely on the Brits to advance their own um, technological progress?
So
I don't
the
know.
way that
I'm not sure what I'm asking. Hmm.
no, I think I understand. So, I mean, we do have in the Civil War era, like I said before, the monitor of the period, right? Which is sort of this flat bottomed, single turret kind of ship, with extremely low freeboard. It's more of a coastal defense ship than anything else, and it's designed to fight in the littoral zone, which is the area directly adjacent to the shoreline, basically. Um, and so like this is the closest thing we have to a proper um, like battleship. I mean, we do have like sailing ships of the line during the Civil War period, but like the Doldrums is named the Doldrums because, excuse me, because you just don't have the type of ships and the navy that other countries have at the time. This is the entire point. You don't. It's a period of retrenchment, and following that, you have a period of renaissance. Right. So essentially, within about 10 or 15 years, you have to think. 1881 is when Secretary Hunt gave his report to Congress, we have USS Atlanta in 1884, the ABCD class. You know, 10, 11 years after that, you've got USS Olympia and the battleship Maine in Texas, right? Um, and then the final five of them, right? The Indiana, Massachusetts, and Oregon. So, and then at the Iowa, of course, in 1897. So, like right before the Spanish-American War happens, you have a kind of a 5 year period of um, just like insane shipbuilding, essentially. Um, I mean, this is really in comparison to like World War II, not a whole lot. Like this is like a handful of ships, maybe a dozen or so,
Not
but they are top of the line for
similar.
their period. I'm sorry, say again.
Gotcha. Like I have two different books. Uh, it's the shipbuilding business. It's they were published in like the 60s by a Society of Naval Architects and Marine Engineers. It's basically a sort of history of it's like a history of um, the profitability of American shipbuilding throughout throughout the existence of the U.S. Navy and the various comparative advantages it had against British shipbuilding or you know or any other countries, just in terms of how much labor costs, how much material costs, and a lot of it talks about how you know, in the Revolutionary era we had very small companies that only bit off a few small projects, and then you get to this late 19th century industrial era, and you just have such a big, massive industry and like all sorts of steel merchant, like steel magnates advocating for a naval buildup just to have more customers, and you have all sorts of competing industrial interests, and it costs so much money to actually build these ships that once you get the ball rolling, you just have to keep putting ships into like keep ordering ships for the factories to keep churning them out. Um, I guess that's part of the whole, I guess, military industrial complex, right? Where you have to have a complex, and it
Mm,
gets less expensive once you actually start embracing like economies of scale, I guess.
this is correct.
Um, but
Yes.
I'm not sure if yeah.
So with that, right, this is one of the points of
And
you
I
might
think
say of
like one of the great shipyards of yeah,
yeah. This is sorry. There's a bit of a lag, I think.
like I
There's
believe one of the great ship yeah.
so all right. So there's basically this is one of
I'm
the
sorry,
the
I'll
points
let you
of
talk.
thank you. There's a bit of this is a couple second lag. So this is one of the points of Mahan, right? You need a standing navy, right? This is a rejection of the sort of Jeffersonian style of naval doctrine, where you're going to do coastal forts and gunboats and that sort of thing. Like obviously that didn't work in the War of 1812, and it doesn't work throughout all of history. The point of a navy is to be able to take the fight to the enemy and into his home waters and deal damage over there. And so, unfortunately, navies are slightly different than armies because the it takes so long between time of construction initially and the like actual commissioning and launching of these ships. Um, basically, the and because the assets are so few, right? In comparison to like the hundreds of thousands of vehicles that you might build, or the tens of thousands of tanks or aircraft or whatever, you maybe get a couple of hundred ships at most. And the problem with this is that the naval, in order to maintain your naval power, you have to have a standing navy, no matter how small. Basically, just to stay on top of the technology, just to keep the training up to standard, just to be able to have the ability to maintain fleet in being. Right. This is the point.
Like just like the entire industrial complex required to actually maintain a navy is one hell of a thing, and I I'm not. Is there a sort of political reason why the the post Civil War presidential administrations just kind of like coasted on their laurels?
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
they already created something. They already created something of a military industrial complex to actually sustain the infrastructure. Uh, why didn't they actually just keep going, or was it just a question of debt, of the national debt, or was it something else?
Well, I'm sure it was, but you have to remember that the war is basically over. There is no need for the United States at this point to maintain a fleet of the size that it did, and this is actually why the Navy and the politicians of the time are criticized, because there were ships of the time which were feasible and actually cutting edge, or workable or decent for their time, I suppose, that were decommissioned after the war ended. And the problem, like, some of these ships were specifically designed to do specific purposes. Like, for example, the Wampanoag, designed by Benjamin Isherwood, was supposed to chase down the CSS Alabama.
Hmm.
So, of course, these are examples of ships that, well, now that these threats don't exist at all anymore, why are you going to keep this very specific hard counter to the current enemy? Why are you going to keep this around when it costs money to do all of that? And like I said before, the political uh, imperatives of the day were not on power projection, they were on consolidation of the interior and the conquest of the American West. So that is not the priority, that is not the emphasis, and so this is why the Navy is kind of left to languish for the this 10 or 15 years.
Like, I mean, I do remember, like, even during the Civil War, like, the USS Wyoming was, it got kind of embroiled in this local, um, like, the USS Wyoming was in, I think, like Japan, and the local daimyo warlord decided, hey, let's expel the foreigners and get into a firefight with this U.S. Frigate.
Yeah,
Uh,
so this is
I could,
actually in China. It's not Japan. It's actually in an incident for Formosa, so at Taiwan, basically. And essentially, this whole incident was set off because a villager on the island killed the crew of a merchant vessel. And so Commander Belknap, Belknap is actually a kind of a famous figure because he has a ship named for him, which famously burned down to the whole line, but that's another story. And he has there is because of that incident, there is a part on the ship called that is named for him. But anyway, so he led a landing party of 180 men from these two Navy sloops and decided to burn the village to the ground, basically, and killing a whole bunch of civilians. So it's kind of an interesting, like, situation, because in terms of American history, you might compare this to, like, My Lai, but this was you know not something that was perceived of as, like, dishonorable at the during the time.
right. Um, I mean, I guess my point was just American interests were actually international, and maintaining gunboat diplomacy in the 19th century was actually somewhat valuable, and it just seems like it was something of a waste for the U.S. to have squandered its military superiority or its naval superiority and not actually become this expansionist power right afterwards.
Right. Well, in
Is
defense of the
I'm
Navy,
kind of getting.
in defense of the Navy, a lot of these ships which were decommissioned were not actually warships. So, right, the number in active service probably was
Like
not
if
higher
I
than
remember correctly,
600, and 400 of them were converted merchant ships, so they aren't actually proper warships. And so, like as we mentioned before, with the Dutch example of converted merchant ships, you don't want that. Like that's good if you're fighting a war where you have to rapidly spin up a military and a navy at scale, and you don't already have the pre-existing infrastructure to do that. But um, basically, the so this is kind of like this might sound like a cope answer, but it's true. Like that's not you're decommissioning ships that have no purpose outside of
like
a very specific emergency.
right, they weren't particularly good ships anyways. Why keep them around? Because they were converted merchant ships. Um, like fair enough.
And a lot of them are coastal monitors. Like I said before, the monitor is a flat bottomed ship. It's there to fight in the littoral zone, and it's not supposed to go crossing the high seas. That's not what its intended purpose is, and so like a lot of this stuff has to do pretty much directly with national strategy and like I mentioned with technology, because it takes so long to create these ships. They are created for a specific purpose, and if that purpose does not align with national strategy, then it doesn't matter how useful they were in the past. You're going to decommission them.
Right. All right. Well, I think I'm just about at the 1 hour mark, so I think I'm going to start wrapping things up. Um, let's see. I'll just I've gotten a good bit of just putting the initial stuff together, but I need to prime everything and start painting. But it's a good start. Um, I think we covered a good bit of the sort of, I guess, the logic of this sort of lesser known period of U.S. naval history that that went into the actual creation of you know, American cruisers like the USS Olympia. Um, do you have anything in particular that you want to show for today's stream?
Other than the event, no, not particularly. Like these last couple of weeks have been very busy in preparation for that. So yes, but I do have ideas for content in the future. I will get back to it as soon as I can. But yes, I have some slight other personal priorities to take care of over the next several months, unfortunately. But I can't change that.
No, well, I hope you know I hope you sort out your business and get back on the it's exhilarating getting back into the content creation cycle. It's it's something that you don't ever really forget, going on to live streams and stuff like that, writing content, producing content. um in terms of, let's see, in terms of comments, we're going to see Melon I've become so numb I can't even feel you there.
Yeah.
He's been on
Yes.
something of a he's been on something of a what would you say? Like whiny pop punk, like Linkin Park posting, like for the
Well,
last
yeah,
weeks.
yeah. That's an inside joke because he reposted me put on Twitter. Um,
Oh,
yes.
cool. Bluestone Heritage League reposted your stream. Well, thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it. Um, I do see Constant Paints Space Marines when. So let's see. I don't actually have any Space Marines I need to paint. I do have a bunch of Adeptus Mechanicus minis that I need to get to. I've neglected my Warhammer armies for a long time. Um, they're just sitting primed and mostly unpainted. So that is a good suggestion. Just I'm more of on my boat arc right now, so I'll get to it eventually.
I will
So
never paint Space Marines again. I painted way too many of them.
like my problem is always that I end up I end up getting a kit and then half painting it, and then I get another kit and I only somewhat paint it, and then I get another kit, and then I end up with what's the term for when you can't decide which one to pick? Um, it's like it's
Indecision.
like I forget what the term is. Yeah, indecisive. Yeah, it's like an indecision, like collapse or whatever it is. Um, yeah, spring out the Magos Kloss. Yep,
I, t-
I should,
I, t-
but
I tell you what I'm excited
not for this
about.
stream. For this stream, we're just yeah,
I tell you what I'm excited about. I'm excited for eventually when Games Workshop comes out
sure.
with the new figure, I guess the old figure of Archeon, the Ever Chosen. I want that. I want that model so bad. But yes, it'll be a
Hmm.
custom armor leg when it comes out. But anyway,
Yeah. Anyway, I'm glad to have you on, Mr. Raging Mandrill, and I will see you at the Old Glory Club National Conference in a few days. I'll see all of you guys on the next stream. I'll see a few of you guys in Nashville. Thank you for watching, and good night.
good night, everybody.
We're proud of ourselves, and we're not going to go down. If you want to come in here and tell us what to do, we're going to throw your ass out. And if you stop